Right, welcome back to our game. Here we are on the morning of the 29th of January. Quite a lot of developments. Got a whole lot of fortifications that have been deserted, as on the 29th the Germans get the order to try and consolidate the pocket, as they have now been surrounded. So these elements, Corps Group B, have pulled back and are trying to form a new line along this river, the Rosaba River. So pulling back some of our units there, some through this very tough, rough terrain near the Dnieper, and stronger units pulling back to the river line here, starting to dig in again. This left-hand side of the Russian penetration is still holding firm. Some of the units who are pushed back are also trying to dig in. We've got a German counterattack going on here. The 198th Anti-Tank Battalion was surrounded, or at least cut off by a Russian spearhead. So we've got one of the Stug battalions, one of the 198th Infantry battalions assisting it with some Stuka strikes to try and break out of that encirclement. Otherwise down here we've done an attack by the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion, pushed the Russians back but made not much else of a difference. Otherwise the rest of the German line here is pretty static, and up here the 5th SS Viking, who were positioned around Zenorovka, have pulled back to hold the southern side of the pocket. That felt their mission. That's what they've been ordered to do. There was actually a gap there, so that brigade-sized group of the 5th SS could have broken out of the encirclement last turn if they had chosen to, but no, they're following their orders to try and seal the southern side of the pocket, prevent the Russians potentially cutting off the remaining airhead into Korsun, which is only just out of reach. Russian forces are much stronger up here now, so the rest of the 20th Tank Corps has arrived. They did a counterattack against elements of the 5th SS last turn, but didn't cause any casualties, just caused some pushbacks. So that's where we are on the 29th of Jan morning turn. We'll move into the afternoon. Again, the weather remains clear, as it has for the last 3 days, and frozen. Here we are against the 29th. The Germans are continuing to pull back from their forward positions on the Dnieper and form up on the Rosova river line, possibly pulling back further. The position held by the 198th is becoming increasingly tenuous. The Russians are penetrating its northern flank, and the Germans will have to consider withdrawing from that salient. They've got very little forces covering this part of the flank, and then 5th SS forming a line here. The 20th Tank Corps has pushed up and fully joined up now with the 5th Guards Tank Corps, which are holding the southern flank, and the Russians have certainly achieved their breakthrough, captured the vast majority of their objectives. The only one they don't really hold is Medvedin, or indeed the northern side of this little village here, but I think that'll happen as the Germans just pull back. Let's see if we get any German counterattacks as we move into the 1st. Okay guys, that was the end of the 29th of Jan, as I said, and obviously it's not the 1st of February the next day, it's the 30th of January the next day. Now, at the night game turn on the 30th of January, which is the last day of the scenario, you get the 17th Panzer Division arriving as reinforcements, closely followed by the 16th Panzer Division, and then ultimately I think the 1st Panzer and 1st SS. They all come in to join the 3rd Panzer Corps down here. But with them only arriving on the night turn, they'll have to move up in column. They won't really be able to fight, and certainly won't be able to break through anywhere. It's a pretty much half-strength Panzer Division, the first of those to arrive. So looking at where we are, the Russians have secured their penetration. They've got a pretty good gap here. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to 14 hexes, 13 to 14 miles worth of penetration at its closest point, so potential German attempt to break through on this axis here, but they're going to actually push this German salient back, I think, with this outflanking move. So the Germans are going to have to pull some units out of this bulge to strengthen their line up here, all the while pulling these units back. So I think we'll say, as happened historically, we have a decisive Russian breakthrough here. Not devastating losses, so for either side we can see the losses here. The Germans lost 2 battalions and the engineering battalion of the 34th Division and a couple of artillery units from the 75th, but actually the 198th, the subject of the major attack, survived unscathed, and we lost 1 battalion of Stugs. For the Russians, we lost 3 engineering battalions. They were often leading the assault against fortified positions, and a couple of battalions of the 180th. They lost 1 unit of the 20th Guards Tank Corps and some other bits and pieces. So light losses, as everyone tended to pull back rather than take step losses. I think that was probably the right thing to do. And the Germans pretty much hung in there. They're not suffering a crushing victory. They still hold a couple of their objectives. I don't think they would fall in the last turn of the game, although this one would be on the point of falling, as the Germans, yeah, probably have a couple of fallback moves to do, given the weight of Russian infantry up there on the left. So they might lose this village, and they'll certainly have to pull back to Medvedin to reform their line, probably along that axis there. All right. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed KORSUN Pocket. I've certainly enjoyed it. I'll certainly play some of the other scenarios in the future. We may do the other flank attack, or we may do the small scenario, which is the first relief effort to try and break through in this sector of the front. All right, cheers guys. Have a great time. See you soon. Okay, here's actually the situation map at the 1st of February, which is pretty much where we played to, looking at this western flank. And as you can see, the only reinforcement the Germans hadn't received, which arrived on the 1st of February, is the 16th Panzer Corps, which hadn't had time to reach the front line, and the 17th is just coming up. Otherwise, down here, 5th Tank Corps is pretty much where it's deployed on the map, and the 20th Corps also in a similar position, although my 20th Corps is slightly to the north. If you look further north here, you can see the Germans have had a success. In reality, the German line is sort of like that in our scenario, so they've hung on to much more of the terrain, and the gap between these relieving panzer divisions and the pocket is much bigger, but the Germans were about to get encircled from that direction with that unit, so this piece was about to fall back. So certainly done better than the historical battle, especially in that pocket that was held by the 198th and 88th, who did reasonably well. And actually you can see the 198th in reality fell to the south, whereas in our game the 198th, apart from 1 battalion, has fallen back to the north. So actually you got more troops trapped, but holding a slightly larger area. The pulling back across the river line is pretty much identical as we saw in the game. So very similar scenario. Pushbacks of the Germans, very much identical. Just that stubborn resistance by the 198th might make the relief efforts for the Germans slightly more straightforward. I might take a photograph of the final deployment and play a scenario where we use that as their starting point. All right, cheers guys.